The phone rang at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, and before the coffee had even finished dripping, my own son told me I had until 2 o'clock to get out of my own house. Not asked. Not warned. Told. Pop, listen. The closing went through last night. The Lakehouse is sold. The new owners are flying in from Dallas this afternoon, so I need you packed and out by 2. Megan already booked a storage place. There's a unit waiting on you. Then he hung up. I stood in my kitchen with dish soap sliding down my wrists, staring at the microwave clock like the numbers might rearrange themselves if I looked long enough. Outside the window, 2 mallards drifted near the dock, calm as anything. Copper, my old red-bone hound, lifted his head off the rug, looked at me once, then dropped it back down and went to sleep. He had no idea his whole world had just been sold out from under him, too. If stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, and the kind of justice that arrives late but lands hard are the sort of thing that keeps you up too late listening, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because this one earns it. Then let me tell you the one thing my son forgot. For 11 years, I had fed those ducks from the back steps every morning. For more than 3 decades, that house had held my wife Ruth's laugh, her garden gloves, her blue heron dish towel, and every quiet morning the 2 of us ever earned together. It was not just a lake house. It was the last place on this earth where I could still feel her sitting beside me. And my son Derek had just sold it like it was an old recliner he needed somebody to haul off. I should have panicked. I should have shouted into the phone. I should have called him back and demanded he explain himself. Instead, I started to laugh. Not because any part of it was funny. Because Derek had forgotten one very important thing. Before my son became a desperate man, buried under debts and lies he could not pay off, I had spent 26 years in commercial title insurance. My whole career had been built on reading the fine print that arrogant people were too important to read for themselves. And the paperwork that proved he had no legal right to sell that house was sitting in a fireproof box under the pantry floor, exactly where I had left it 8 years before. That house was never just wood, glass, and lakefront dirt. It was the place where Ruth and I learned how to be young, then tired, then old together. We bought it back in 1991 when the dock leaned to one side and the mosquitoes were mean enough to carry off a small child. Everybody we knew said we were fools for paying $84,000 for 14 acres of swampy lakefront out in East Texas. Ruth loved it anyway, she said. The cypress trees looked like a row of old men standing in the water, keeping each other's secrets. She planted dogwood near the boathouse, hung wind chimes off the porch, and embroidered little blue herons onto our kitchen towels because a real one used to land on our dock every afternoon, patient as a preacher. By the morning Derek made that call, the foolish little house we overpaid for was worth north of $3 million. But to me, it was worth more than any number a realtor could ever print on a sign. It was where my wife drank coffee in her robe while Copper chased squirrels he was never once fast enough to catch. It was where she told me the cancer had come back the second time, in a voice so steady it scared me worse than crying would have. It was where I held her hand in the back bedroom with the lake turning silver outside the window. And it was where I woke up alone for the first time after 42 years of marriage. So when my son told me the lake house had been sold, he was not only taking my property. He was trying to erase the last place on earth where my wife still felt real. And the cruelest part was how casual he sounded doing it. No apology. No shame. Just a deadline, packed and out by 2. Like I was a piece of furniture the previous owner forgot to clear out before closing. I looked over at Ruth's blue heron towel hanging by the sink, still damp from my hands, and something deep inside me went very, very still. Derek thought grief had made me weak. What he never understood was that grief had made me patient. 8 years before that phone call, when Ruth's cancer came back the second time, the 2 of us sat across a desk from an accountant in Tyler who spoke to us in the soft, careful voice people use around sickness, like loud words might knock something loose. He told us we needed to make things easy. No probate fight. No tax mess. No confusion the day one of us was gone. Ruth sat beside me in a pale gray sweater, thinner than she used to be, slowly turning her wedding ring around her finger while the accountant explained the family trust. Derek would be the named beneficiary. He would also be the successor trustee if either of us ever became unable to manage our own affairs. The Lakehouse would be protected. Everything, he kept saying, would be simple. That was the word he leaned on. Simple. By then, Ruth liked simple. The pain had made her tired of decisions. She turned to me and said, "Walt, I just don't want Derek dealing with a mess after we're gone." So I signed. But I did not stop reading. That night, after Ruth went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the trust papers spread out in front of me, a yellow legal pad on one side and a glass of bourbon on the other. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator, humming and copper snoring by the back door. Most folks sign whatever the smiling man behind the desk slides across to them, and they trust the smile. I had spent my whole working life finding what those smiling men forgot to mention, and what I read on page 7 bothered me. Derek was named as beneficiary. That part was clean. But the successor trustee language gave him more room than I liked. Far too much room, the kind of room a frightened, desperate man could one day talk himself into believing meant ownership. As written, if I were ever declared unable to handle my affairs, he could step in and act on the trust's behalf with very little standing in his way. So the next week I called Hal Mercer. Hal was a property lawyer who had been my brother-in-law once, years back, before my sister divorced him. He and I stayed friends anyway, because some men get easier to trust the moment they stop trying to be family. 2 weeks later, with Ruth none the wiser, Hal and I added an amendment that Derek never knew existed. As long as I was alive and of sound mind, my son could not sell, transfer, mortgage, or so much as breathe on that house without my written consent. Any claim of my incapacity required a signed certification from a licensed physician, filed in advance. And if he ever tried to move on that house without both of those things, his rights under the trust did not shrink. They vanished. Derek did not know about that amendment. That was exactly why he believed he could move fast, sign a stack of papers, take a lowball cash offer, and turn my entire life into a moving truck before lunch. He sold the Lakehouse for $2,100,000. That might sound like a fortune to some people, but anybody who knew that stretch of water knew he had practically given it away. Lots half the size of mine were already being whispered about at numbers north of 3 million. But Derek did not care about value. He cared about speed. A fair price would have taken time. Inspections, appraisals, careful attorneys, a buyer who might look a little too closely at the trust and start asking the wrong questions. Derek needed money that cleared the bank before anybody had a chance to lift the rug and see what was crawling around underneath it. And that told me something important. Whatever my son was running from, it was close enough now to breathe on the back of his neck. He had signed a sworn affidavit claiming he had full authority to sell. To get the title company comfortable, he had told them I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs, which made him the acting trustee. He had let those people rely on that lie. Then he had emailed me the closing documents afterward, almost like a receipt, the way you might update an old file you were about to throw away. The email was 1 line long. "Pop, sending this for your records." For your records. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We need to talk." Not even, "I made a terrible mistake." Just a paper trail from a son who had decided his father was too old, too sad, and too alone to understand what had just happened to him. I sat at that kitchen table with the email glowing on the screen, Ruth's ring heavy in my pocket, and I felt the anger cool down into something a great deal more useful. Derek had not just tried to steal the house. By selling it the way he did, he had reached out and pulled the exact lever that erased him from it forever. I did not call my son back. That was the first smart thing I did that morning. The second was walking into the pantry. Behind the canned tomatoes and the jars of peach preserves Ruth used to put up every summer, there was a loose floorboard I had cut myself in the spring of 1994. Derek had walked across that floor 1,000 times as a boy, usually hunting for cookies or a root beer, and he had never once noticed it. I lifted the board and pulled out a faded green lockbox. Inside was the amendment. My hands were steady when I opened it, and that surprised me. Maybe the fear had already moved through me and left something sharper in its place. Then I called Hal Mercer. Hal was 71 now, half retired and mean in the particular way only an old property lawyer can be mean. He answered on the fourth ring. "Walt, it's barely morning. Either you're dying or you finally caught a fish worth bragging about." I looked down at the trust papers on the table. Derek sold the Lakehouse. There was a silence on the line, not confusion, recognition. Then Hal exhaled, slow and long, and said, "Does that boy have the first idea what a revocation clause is?" "No," I said, "I do not believe he does." "Good. Put on a real shirt. I'll be out there in 2 hours." I looked through the kitchen window at the dock, at the gray morning water, at the place Ruth had loved more than anywhere else in this world. For the first time since the phone rang, I smiled. Not because I was safe. Because I finally understood exactly how my son was going to lose. Those 26 years in title insurance had taught me one plain rule. Never trust the story people tell you about a piece of property until the paperwork tells you the same thing. That rule was about to save my house. Derek thought he was robbing a lonely widower who had quit fighting the day his wife died. He did not understand that grief had not erased my old instincts. It had only made them quiet, and a quiet man who knows how to read a deed can be dangerous to underestimate. Hal did not come alone that morning. By noon, he had a man named Russ digging through the life my son had been pretending was solid. I had known Russ for years. I never asked exactly what he did for a living. Some men are useful precisely because you have the good sense not to ask too many questions. At 12:40, Hal set his phone in the middle of my kitchen table and put Russ on speaker. I sat there with a fresh yellow legal pad, the same kind I used back when finding cracks in other people's paperwork paid my mortgage. Russ's voice was flat. That somehow made it worse. Derek had not closed a real recruiting deal in 14 months. The polished downtown office on his website was nothing but a rented mailbox. He was $380,000 behind on a second mortgage. He owed the Internal Revenue Service $112,000. Megan had run up close to $200,000 in credit card debt, most of it tied to a horse stable out in Katy, where she had decided, at 39 years old, that she was going to become a competitive rider. I wrote down every number. Then Russ said the thing that made my pen stop moving. My grandson Ethan had been pulled out of his private school because the tuition had gone unpaid for 2 semesters. Derek and Megan were telling people it was a family wellness sabbatical. It was not. It was shame, dressed up in nicer clothes. I looked out at the dock, where Ruth used to sit with Ethan when he was little, teaching him how to toss bread to the ducks without spooking them off the water. That boy had lost his school while his mother paid stable fees and his father gambled with my house. And all at once, I understood the whole shape of it. Derek had not sold the Lakehouse because he wanted a fresh start. He sold it because every lie he had ever told had finally come due on the same week, and they all sent their bills at once. But the debt was not the part that broke me. Debt happens. Failure happens. I could have understood panic, even where I could never excuse it. What I could not understand was the story Derek had been telling about me. Russ kept talking, and with every sentence, my own kitchen seemed to get a little smaller around me. For nearly a year, my son had been telling Megan's family that I was losing my mind. Not forgetful, not lonely, not grieving. Demented. He told them I got confused about what day it was. He told them I left the burners running. He told Megan's father, a retired oil man with more money than warmth, that I had personally asked Derek to handle my affairs because I was no longer fit to make decisions for myself. And then came the worst part of all. He told them the money from selling the Lakehouse would pay to place me in a memory care facility. I looked down at my own hands resting on the table. The same hands that had rebuilt that dock after a storm tore half of it loose. The same hands that had held Ruth's when the pain got too big for her to hold by herself. The same hands that had signed a birthday card for Derek every single year, even the long stretch when he stopped calling to say thank you. My son had taken those hands and turned them into evidence that I could not be trusted. He had not only tried to steal my home, he had tried to steal my mind. That was the moment Hal stopped pacing the kitchen. "Walt," he said, "quiet now. Do you want to call him?" I looked through the window at the dogwood Ruth, planted by the boathouse. Its leaves were going red around the edges, like the whole tree already knew October was on its way. "No," I said, because if I had called Derek right then, I would have shouted. And shouting would have warned him. So I closed the legal pad. I slid Ruth's wedding ring out of my pocket and held it in my fist a moment. And I decided that my son was about to learn that calling an old man crazy is a very dangerous thing to do when that old man kept every last receipt. I did not want Derek warned. That part mattered more than anything. If I confronted him too soon, he would start moving money around, calling lawyers, blaming everyone on earth but himself. Cornered men do not confess. They scatter. So I did the one thing that felt nearly impossible. I stayed quiet. Hal watched me from across the table while I went through every document my son had signed. The false affidavit, the closing statement, the rushed wire transfer, the sale price so low it practically had the word panic stamped across the top. "You want me to stop it tonight?" Hal asked. I looked at the clock. By now, Derek believed the deal was finished. The buyers believed they owned the house. Megan probably believed their debts were about to melt away by morning. Every one of them was standing on a floor that had already cracked clean through. "No," I said. "Let him believe he won tonight." Hal's mouth twitched, almost into a smile. I tapped the stack of papers. "Tomorrow morning, you file the revocation, you notify the title company, you notify the buyer's attorney, you freeze that wire if there's any way to freeze it, and you make sure Derek's sworn affidavit lands exactly where it needs to land." Hal leaned back in his chair. "That'll ruin his week." I looked toward the back bedroom where Ruth had died, toward the closet where her dresses still hung in their careful order of color. "No," I said, "it'll tell him the truth. That's worse, because revenge would have been screaming at my son until my throat gave out, and he hung up on me again." This was something different. This was preparation. This was letting a grown man walk every single step into the consequences he had built with his own two hands. That night, I let my son fall asleep believing he had stolen my house. By morning, he was going to find out he had only signed away his last claim to it. At 6:02 the next evening, before any of the filings had even gone through, the doorbell rang. I had braced for the buyers to come in smiling, jingling keys, already picturing new curtains and long holiday weekends on the dock. Instead, I opened the door to a couple in their early 60s who looked every bit as uncomfortable as I felt. The husband was tall and white-haired, dressed like a man who had done well for himself and hated to show it. His wife held a small bunch of grocery store flowers up against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Dawson?" he asked. "That's me." "I'm Howard Bennett. This is my wife, Carol. We were told you'd already be gone." "I imagine you were." Carol's face changed first. Her eyes moved past me into the house, then down to Copper leaning his old body against my leg, then back up to my face with a slow, dawning horror. Howard lowered his voice. "Sir, is there a problem with the closing?" I could have been angry at the two of them. For one hot second, I wanted to be. They were standing on my porch with flowers, ready to walk into Ruth's kitchen and start calling it theirs. But then I really looked at their faces. They had been lied to as well. So I stepped back and held the door open. "Mr. Bennett, you and your wife had better come in. I'm going to pour you a drink, show you one piece of paper, and then my lawyer is going to call your lawyer. But before any of that, I want you to understand something. I do not think the two of you are bad people. I think my son sold you a house he had no legal right in this world to sell." Carol's hand went up over her mouth. Howard shut his eyes for one long second. Then he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "We'd best come in then." I led them to the kitchen table where Ruth and I had once signed the very papers Derek never bothered to read. And for the first time all day, I told the whole truth out loud, start to finish. I showed the Bennetts the amendment first. Not the gossip, not Derek's debts, not the ugly business about my supposed dementia. The paper. Howard put on a pair of reading glasses and bent over the table. Carol sat beside him with both hands wrapped around a bourbon glass she had barely touched. Howard read the clause twice. Then he took his glasses off, slow. So he could not legally sell this house, he said. No, I answered. Not without my signature, not without a doctor's certification that I'd lost my faculties. There was neither. And you never signed anything. I did not. Carol's eyes filled. We sold our place in Dallas, she whispered. We wired everything we had yesterday afternoon. I know, I said, and I'm sorry for what my son did to you. I truly am. Hal arrived a little after 9 with his briefcase and the expression of a man walking into a fight he had already won on paper. He called the Bennetts' attorney. Then he called the title company. Then he sent formal notice that the deed was void from the very beginning, as if it had never existed at all. The whole time, Derek kept calling. 4 times, I let every single one of them roll to voicemail. Because by then, I was not setting a trap anymore. I was just standing back and letting the truth finish what my son had so foolishly started. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Hal filed everything. At 8:47, Derek called again. This time, I answered. For a moment, there was nothing but breathing on the line. Not the confident voice from the morning before. Not the son who had ordered his own father out of his home, like a tenant 3 months behind on rent. This voice was small. Pop, he said, what did you do? I was sitting out on the dock with Copper stretched beside me and a warm mug between my hands. The lake was flat and still. A heron stood near the railing, watching the water like nothing in the world had changed. I didn't do anything, Derek, I said. You did. The bank froze the wire. The title company says the deed is void. They're using the word fraud. Pop, you have to fix this. You have to call them and fix this. There it was. Not, are you all right? Not, where did you sleep last night? Not, I'm sorry I tried to throw you out of the home Mom loved. Just fix this. I closed my eyes a second and saw Ruth in that kitchen, folding dish towels, humming something under her breath. I thought of Derek as a boy, running barefoot down this same dock, sunburned and laughing, hollering at me to watch him jump. That boy was long gone. The man on the phone was crying now. Megan doesn't know everything, he said. The kids. Pop, please, I'm begging you. I let him cry a while. Then I said his name once, calm enough that he finally went quiet. Derek. Yesterday morning you gave me less than 8 hours to leave my own house. You told strangers I had dementia. You sold your mother's home to cover debts you created. And now the very first thing you asked me to do is save you from the truth. He whispered, I'm sorry. No, I said. You're trapped. There is a difference, and one day you'll understand it. The silence after that was the most honest thing that had passed between us in years. I did not raise my voice. That seemed to frighten Derek more than any amount of yelling could have. Here is what happens now, I told him. The Bennetts get back every penny they wired, down to the last dollar. You are going to write them an apology by hand before the end of this week. Not an email, not something Megan types up for you. Your handwriting, your shame, both. He made a broken sound on the other end of the line. The title company is sending your affidavit to the district attorney's office, I went on. What happens after that is between you and the law. I will not push them toward prison. I will not shield you from it either. You signed your name to a sworn lie, Derek. That signature is yours alone. Pop, please. No. The word came out clean and whole. For years, I had softened that word for him, turned it into maybe, turned it into let me think about it, turned it into one more chance, because Ruth would have wanted peace in the family more than she wanted anything. But Ruth had also wanted dignity, hers and mine both. And that morning, sitting on the dock she loved, I finally remembered I still had some. Your name is coming off the trust, I said. The Lakehouse is mine again, fully and legally, the way it always should have been. When I die, it goes where I decide it goes. Not where your debts decide. Not where Megan's family decides. Not where your lies point. He was crying harder now. I looked down at Copper sleeping against my boot, then out at the water Ruth had loved her whole life. I am not your bank, Derek. I am not your escape hatch. I am your father. And being your father does not mean handing you a match to burn down everything your mother and I built, just because you're too scared to stand in the ashes of your own choices. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. Then I said the part that mattered most of all. I still love you, but I do not trust you. And from today forward, you are going to have to live with both of those things being true at the same time. Then I told him the only mercy I had left to give. Ethan is not part of this. Derek went quiet. My grandson was 12 years old then. Old enough to know when the adults around him were lying, too young to understand why. He had already lost his school, his friends, and the steady rhythm that made his world feel safe. Not one bit of that was his doing. You pulled that boy out of school and dressed it up as a wellness break, I said. You let your son carry your shame without even telling him what he was carrying, so when all this is over, I want a phone call from Ethan. Not from you, from him. If he wants to know me, he is going to have a grandfather. He is going to have summers at this lake. I looked over at the live oak by the boathouse, the one Ruth always said was strong enough to hold a treehouse. For years I had pictured building one up in its branches for the grandkids, and I stopped the day Derek stopped bringing them around. Now, for the first time in a long while, that picture came back to me, clear as the water. But you, I said, are not going to be on those calls. You are not going to sit on my dock. You are not going to carry your excuses into this house, not until you have done the real work to become a man I can stand to trust in the same room. Do you hear me, Derek? Yes, he whispered. Good. Then I ended the call. I sat out there with the phone in my lap until the coffee in my mug went cold. Copper rested his gray muzzle on my boot, and out on the lake the heron lifted off the dock and disappeared into the morning fog like it was carrying something away from me. For the first time in years, my house felt like mine again. What came after did not feel like winning, at least not at first. It felt more like a storm finally reaching land after a long, ugly wait offshore. The Bennetts got back every dollar within 9 days. Howard mailed me a short note afterward on thick cream-colored paper, saying he was sorry my own family had put me through such a thing. That November, he and Carol came back out to the lake, not as buyers this time, but as guests. We ate brisket on the dock until the sun went down. Copper accepted Howard only after a solid half hour and 2 generous pieces of meat, which is about as fast as that dog ever forgave anybody. Derek was not so fortunate. His sworn affidavit went to the district attorney. The title company wanted as much distance from him as the law allowed. Megan's family, the same people he had been feeding stories about my failing mind, suddenly had lawyers of their own asking pointed questions. He was charged with theft by deception and with forgery tied to the false statement he had signed. In the end, he took a reduced plea because the evidence left him almost no room to keep pretending he was the victim. He served 4 months in the county jail and then walked out on probation, thinner, quieter, and finally without an audience left to impress. Megan filed for divorce that March. The horse was sold at auction. Their house out in Sugarland slid into foreclosure before the summer. The shiny, polished life my son had been performing for everybody he knew collapsed so completely that there was nothing left underneath it to pretend about. He asked me once to help with his legal fees. I said no. He asked later if I would come and visit him. I said, not yet. But I did send him 1 letter while he was inside, 1 page, 5 sentences, no lecture, no verse of scripture, no soft, forgiving ending to make myself feel better. The last line of it read, I love you and I do not trust you. That was the truth. And sometimes the truth is the only mercy a man has left to offer, once the person in front of him has spent years living on lies. Peace did not arrive all at once. I want to be honest about that. The house felt changed for a while after my son's betrayal. For weeks, every room held an echo. His voice on the phone. Those 4 flat words, packed and out by 2. I would catch myself standing in the hallway, just listening to the quiet, remembering how close I had come to being handled like a problem somebody else had already solved on my behalf. Then Ethan called. It was a Saturday in February. His voice was careful at first, like he had been told too many grown-up things, and was afraid one wrong word might shatter something fragile. We talked for 40 minutes about a video game I did not understand, a science project that somehow involved vinegar and a great deal of baking soda, and whether or not Copper would still remember him. He will, I told the boy, but fair warning, he may charge you a biscuit tax at the door. Ethan laughed. That laugh did something no court filing on earth could have done. It gave the house a future again. By spring, I had started building the tree house up in the live oak by the boathouse. Ruth always swore that tree was just waiting on children. I sanded the boards slow, measuring twice every time, the way she used to tease me for doing. Some afternoons, I wore her wedding ring on a chain under my shirt and talked to her out loud while I worked. I told her the kids were coming back. I told her the lake was still ours. And I told her I had finally learned, late as it was, that loving somebody does not mean letting them erase you to make their own life easier. This summer, Ethan and his little sister are going to sleep in the upstairs room under the old quilt Ruth stitched by hand. They will feed the ducks off the end of the dock. Copper will pretend, very poorly, that he does not like having them around. And maybe, for the first time in years, this house is going to sound like a family again. If there is one thing that whole Tuesday morning taught me, it is this. Love does not mean handing somebody the knife just because they happen to share your blood. For too long, I believed that being a father meant absorbing every hurt, staying quiet, making excuses, and calling all of it peace. But peace that requires you to disappear is not peace at all. It is surrender, wearing the family name like a coat it never earned. Derek did not lose the Lakehouse because I hated him. He lost it because he forgot that love still needs boundaries. He forgot that grief does not make a man stupid. He forgot that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one who read every single line before he ever signed his name. These days, when I sit out on the dock in the evening, Copper asleep beside my chair and the heron standing patient in the shallow water, I do not feel victorious in the loud way people imagine victory. I feel steady. The house is still here. Ruth's dogwood still blooms by the boathouse every spring. Her ring still rests against my chest, and soon enough my grandchildren will run across this yard, feed the ducks off the dock, fall asleep under their grandmother's quilt, and grow up knowing that this place was saved for them, not stolen out from under them by their father's lies. Derek is living with his consequences, the way a man eventually has to. Ethan and his sister still have a grandfather, and I still wake up every morning in the home my wife and I built out of patience, hard work, and 42 years of love. So no, my son did not take everything from me. In the end, all he really did was show me what I still had the strength left to protect. If this story stayed with you, tell me down in the comments where you are listening from tonight. And be honest with me, would you have stayed quiet and gathered your proof the way I did, or would you have confronted him the moment that phone rang? Subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of quiet justice that finally lets a person sleep in peace.